Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Geek. Welcome back to the channel, and welcome at last, long last, to another episode of the Writer's Room. And as you know, Ishi usually heads this up and hosts things for us, but tonight, the lovely Cat Rocha is our host, so I will turn it over to her.
Oh, thank you. And yes, it has definitely been way too long. I am so glad to be here with all of you, Professor, Dr. Wright, everybody who's joining us in the show right now. So let's get started. Tonight, we are going to talk about research. Oh, yeah, I know sometimes that can be a dirty word, but it is.
Oh, man. I thought I left that behind at school.
So let's get started. For each person in the room, why is researching what you're writing important to you?
So I get it right.
Yeah.
So, I don't believe that space horses can survive an atmosphere on top of a spaceship while the thrust of something that would move 220 million tons of metal is not even moving the water behind it. Those kind of reasons.
But the space horses have the force.
Sure. I mean, they have the force of manure. I've been around horses. I know what kind of force they have.
The power of Disney.
Yeah, the power of Disney, exactly.
I would say it's important so that your readers don't get tripped up and distracted from your story by something that they personally know to be impossible or know to be wrong. You're writing a story about set in a certain time, and you're talking to one of your readers is an expert on that time period or in that career field or whatever, and you get that one little thing wrong and it'll just sit there and bug the heck out of them. And it doesn't matter if your story's amazing, you got that thing wrong, and that's that you've lost credibility in their eyes, and it's hard for them to just go along with your story.
That's actually why I should have liked the film Pandorum, but I don't. Is precisely because there was just a few glaring errors that I just couldn't forgive.
Like
what film is that? I'm blanking on that.
Pandorum is people consider it a spiritual successor to the Event Horizon.
Oh, okay.
Was it Dennis Quaid, and they're on a generation ship to a new planet because Earth is overpopulated. And,
Gotcha.
The ship's just gone completely nuts, and they're like mutated humans running everywhere.
Gotcha.
It had a lot going for it, but there were a couple elements, especially the ending, that were just so glaringly unbelievable. If you know anything about genetics, that it just wrecked it for me.
How unbelievable was it?
They were going to repopulate an entirely new planet with about 1,000 people.
That's not going to work.
They'd be dead in a generation or two.
Yeah.
But it's going to make for a lot of fun for those beginning people. Or maybe, I don't know, like when we came over and tried to populate America, while the Indians were still here, though, we had some issues, especially like, was it like the Chesapeake Valley? We kept drinking the water, and it was kind of funny. Like if you look back at history, Indians were like, hey, that's bad. You shouldn't do that. And we kept drinking it and kept dying of dysentery.
So for me, research. Well, I'm a bit of a research obsessive myself, possibly even research too much. Would that be a fair statement? I
don't know about too much. I mean, I don't think that you could research too much, but it's all, there has to be a point to it, I think.
Well, okay, then I guess I don't research too much, but
no.
I really like to throw myself into any subject matter that I'm writing about. I've talked about this before, where while I'm working on something, I try to pretty much eat, breathe, sleep, and just consume only that subject matter and things related to it, so that I know what I'm talking about and getting into the right mindset. So for me, research is vital. But you want to continue?
For yours?
No, just keep moving us forward.
Oh, okay. So I think a great thing to do is sometimes people don't know like how to approach researching a particular subject or what it is in their story that they need to research. Sometimes it's kind of hard to be able to tell what information you need to look into and what you don't, oftentimes because you're very close to the story. So what is it, how is it that all of you approach researching a particular subject for your story, for your book, etc.?
Well, as I said, for me, I try to immerse myself in the culture of whatever I'm doing. When it was Titanium Rain, it was Air Force and military culture in general, as well as history, military history, and avionics, and just the whole history of aviation. And I was reading everything from tech manuals to histories of battles to fighter pilot biographies. We were visiting museums, so I could get up in front of the planes and take a look at them, touch them, sit inside them, anything I could. Mm-hmm. With Case File Arkham, we watched noir films nonstop, listened to the music period, read nothing but noir novels. I was immersing myself in the media of the time period so that
Did you find yourself wearing trench coats and walking around with long stem cigarettes?
No, I didn't do that part. But the thing about noir is, unlike reality, the only thing that won't kill you is cigarettes and alcohol.
Right.
Everything else will, but those two won't kill you in a noir story. But anyway, yeah, I was immersing myself in like old radio shows, news programs of the era, anything I could to really get a sense of where the mindset of that time period was, what was thinking, and the history of the genre itself, why the genre itself came about, what informed its creation. So yeah, I have a very immersive form of research for myself.
Well, to follow up on that, I'd be curious to ask you, Ishii, then, since that is your form of research, what's the germ of your story? What gets you started on that? Are you interested? Do you think, okay, I want to tell a sort of a noir-like story about this character? I mean, is that does the genre, does the time, does everything kind of come to you at once with a story?
Case File Arkham was kind of a unique situation in which the artist and I were talking, and it originally started that everyone kept asking us to do a Lovecraft story, and about 3 weeks in, we decided, we really didn't want to do a Lovecraft story. That it just had no real interest for me. I mean, the universe itself was very fascinating, but Lovecraft's characters, the world always happens to them. They're a victim of the setting. They don't interact. And as I kept going through the Lovecraft stuff, I kept thinking to myself, what would be great is to have a detective who's actually going to get in there and dig in and cause problems. And, when the monster pops up, punch it and just keep going no matter how bleak it gets. And that was the spark that fed it. Mm-hmm. And I started talking to the artist, and he's like, yeah, that's kind of what I want to do too. Like, you ever seen that movie Angel Heart or Lord of Illusion? And then they just went from there. Yeah. But usually most of my stories come from a collision of ideas and concepts in my head. And it's kind of, where do ideas come from? That's kind of a difficult question in itself. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, it usually is, I'll have a set of things on my mind, and then various bits and pieces of narratives that I've been sitting on for years. And one day, usually in a half awake state, they'll just click and I'll see them connect. And then it's time to write a story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting, because I'm kind of the exact opposite. I'll do research when it's necessary, but if I were to start with research, I would spend 6 months to a year procrastinating the actual writing of the story, with the research. And for me, a story will usually come in terms of whatever the conflict is between the characters, or the desire is between the characters, or whatever. So so just for example, let's say if I wanted to write a story about a man whose girlfriend or wife or whatever is she's gonna die tragically young, and he finds some way to preserve her life through technology or something like that. Okay, so that would be like that would get me to start writing. But then as I was writing, if I thought, you know what, this would actually really work or be more interesting, I'd rather than use computers and all of that, I'd rather use like steampunk, technology to try and like cyborg her out or something. Then I would have to go in, and then I would have to spend a little time, researching that genre to make sure I got it right. But for me, I have to start writing the story first, and then that dictates to me what I need to do the research on. So it is a little bit of a danger for me, Kat, the way you were framing that question. Sometimes, a reader later on will say, maybe you ought to get this a little bit, because like I have a story coming out in an anthology next year in which a woman is frozen by, I said what did I say? I said cryogenics, but apparently it's actually a cryostasis. Or maybe I got that switched wrong. I don't know. I wrote it down, and then I didn't worry about it anymore. But whatever. I had to, like, somebody, a reader later had to say, no, this is actually what that's called. This is actually what the idea of that technology is, or whatever, So yeah, it's a danger for me to sometimes not do enough.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think that I don't know, like I can see where Ish is coming from. I do a lot of research. I mean, I mostly write dark fantasy, or pretty much anything where I can take mythology and kind of put it on its head and think of it a different way. But when I write about that, I always like to do it intuitively. But to write about something that's mythological or fictional intuitively, you have to completely understand it. You've got to understand the actual bones that make it up, instead of just it's kind of outer periphery, or, just what you've heard from someone else. So, I mean, I could really understand, especially being an aerospace technician and a manager for a long time, you wanting to get in and, sit in the cockpit, or flight deck nowadays. I'm sorry. You wanted to sit in the airplane, check it out, look at the feel of it, because I can see as a writer, like what you're doing, it's almost like an actor, right? Like you're putting yourself in the situation of, if this happened, how would I feel? How would I feel if the engine's on fire, the canopy doesn't pop off, and I've got to get out? What do I do? Well, there's a crash axe and there's a hammer in the plane for those cases, and there has been since the 40s, but still, it's scary, right? Does a human think of that? Can you think of that in that moment? What are you thinking in that moment? You've only got 2 moments and then you're dead. Yeah. And there's just a lot of things like that. And I could see how actually getting into the plane and understanding, how do the mechanics, how do the avionics work? How does it, how does it direct itself? What does it tell the pilot? You know what I mean? Like things like and then you get into what you were talking about earlier, which I call, we've talked about it before. Kat and Ish were talking about this last time. I call it a budget for your willingness to disbelieve, for the reader's willingness to disbelieve, right? And I remember you guys had a specific phrase for that. I can't remember what that was. Do you remember?
Tipping the goofy meter.
Yep.
There you go. And, in this case, like my dad, like, he's been a technician. I was a technician for 7 years, then I got into management. My dad was a technician for 37 years. Okay. So when he saw the movie Die Hard 2, he couldn't stand it. Because there's no way you could do that to an airplane, that you could make a plane think it's coming down. It has 8 different sensors that when you come down within 200 feet, go whoop, whoop, pull up, whoop, whoop, pull up. Or like, I think like 1,000 feet. But anyway, there's just so many correctional, because obviously, like, plane down, sky good, earth bad, and so they have so many sensors to tell you, like, not to hit the ground, that wouldn't happen. And I remember a really good movie. Do you remember the movie Sicario?
I've never seen it. I need to.
Okay. Well, was it Denis Villeneuve, the guy's doing the new Dune, right?
Yeah.
Okay. He actually directed that. That was one of his, his outstanding movies. And what's funny, though, is I remember watching a Joe Rogan episode where there's an ex-SEAL operative who watched the movie, and he said it turned him off within the first 3 minutes when he saw that the actual gun operation was incorrect. And so that's kind of what you guys are going for, right? Is you're saying that, like, you can turn some certain people off by having these things. And me writing, like, and it happens even when you're writing about, cyberpunk or fiction or any kind of fiction or you know, especially like fantasy and stuff, it's still got to be intuitive. You know what I mean?
I've got a few examples of that specifically, actually. And the bit about both the plane, you're mentioning the plane screams at you, hey, pull up. I mean, it actually will say that.
Yeah, it's literally, it goes, whoop, whoop, pull up.
Pull up. Pull, yeah. And, you know, the SEAL who said, no, that's not how you operate the gun. I've found that not only knowing that gives a sense of realism to what you're saying, since you're writing from these characters' perspective, they should know these things. Furthermore, I've found that knowing these things tends to open and expand your storytelling possibilities. Just as a quick example, for instance, I had written a story about a character who was an amputee. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I took a note for this so I could read it back. Yeah, little details matter. I wrote a story about a man who was who had an amputated leg. Now, amputees need to wear an elastic sock over their stump at night, otherwise the blood will pool up in their stump and it'll swell like a melon.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that. Did you?
No, I've seen them wear that sock, but I never knew that was the reason why. Huh?
And if I had missed that detail, I would be overlooking something that my character would be dealing with every morning and every evening.
Mm-hmm.
Was that sock. And that's a very minor thing, but then you start to realize and you realize, okay, swelling is a big deal with amputees.
Mm-hmm.
That became a story component.
Yeah.
Okay, two things. We have a question from Aged Boomer, and then I promised Mohammed that I would get to his question. Aged Boomer says, can you give us an example from popular culture of when writers clearly did do their research? Real quick, I'm just going to say, if you've been watching the chat, the film Stargate, they did do their research on Egyptology and deciphering the hieroglyphics and how originally the hieroglyphics were totally off base. So that's a film where they did do their research. You guys?
Anything by Michael Crichton.
Yeah, actually, I would say that is the point in which you're letting your research take center stage.
Yeah.
At that point, you think, hey, look, did you know I research?
Yeah. Michael Crichton's forte, IMO, is the first 200 pages are his dissertation on whatever he's telling you about in that particular book. And then you get to a story.
Yeah. I would say that Elroy, his fiction is really good for police procedural, without it ever taking center stage, as well as the dirt and grime of Hollywood.
No, I think there it's more of his characters run away with his story than the plot does. But that's another topic for another day.
James Elroy, definitely excellent in terms of research.
If I had more time, I'm sure I could come up with some examples. But I'm not one of these people who I mean, you know, what is my field? What is the thing I've studied? Well, story. So I really don't have something extra, you know, that I could say, okay, I know a lot about that or whatever, you know, to compare or judge in movies. But it is for me, you know, being such a story focused person, I'm not the reader that will catch a lot of those discrepancies. Or if I do catch a discrepancy, I'm not one of those readers who will get tripped up on it and just can't, you know, absolutely can't, unless it's like really blatantly obvious, like Brian Michael Bendis writing Barry Allen as Wally West and thinking, what? It's the Flash, right? You know, that's you know, something like that, I guess, is really bad. But because I'm like that, it is all the more vital for me to not just be, you know, lazy with that, you know, when it comes to the research in my writing. And I really do have to realize there are readers out there who do not have as much mercy as I do for stuff like that. And I need to really put the time in and get this right.
Well, another reason research is so important and why. Oh, wait, did Mohammed did Mohammed?
Yeah, he does have a question.
Okay, should we?
Yeah. And Mohammed had asked the question where, you know, he does like realism, but to a point. And sometimes you need to have fantasy. So how do you approach research when doing your fantasy stories?
Oh, perfect. That's what I was actually about to answer.
Oh, okay.
Research for anything you're doing matters. And I've heard often the excuse, well, I'm making a whole fictional universe, so it doesn't matter. I don't need to research. It's entirely mine. Well, Bullshit. Let's say fantasy is usually the one that I hear brought up the most, right? The thing is that every job, every skill, every culture and subculture has its own lingo. And not only does that inform how your character talks, but also how you write your narrative. And what I mean by that is, for instance, each skill set has its own set of words used to describe it, waiting for you to use, waiting for you to take advantage of. For instance, let's say you're writing a sword fight. Very common thing in fantasy, right? Does your character block the bad guy's sword with his blade? No, that's how an unexperienced person would explain that happening. A trained swordsman would say he parried or deflected the enemy's blade.
Yeah, you're using less energy.
Well, no, it just shows an air of professionalism. Or, getting to say a fighter pilot or Star Wars. Does a fighter pilot grab the controls of his jet and push it to top speed? No. He would ram the throttle forward and take it to afterburner. And these are descriptors waiting for you to use.
Mm-hmm.
It makes your job that much easier and makes your writing that more authentic.
Yeah. I mean, I think especially like within fantasy. I mean, since I do write a lot of fantasy, this is right in my alley. Right up my alley. I think that even though it is fantasy, people, again, they still want it to be intuitive. They want it to make sense. You know what I mean? It adds a little bit more. Like, I have at one point in the story where one of the characters is, she can, because she became so close to death, she sees the weave that other people don't. And she can actually create spells because of that, because she can see the spells created in the weave and then recreate them because they're patterns in the weave. And when she recreates the pattern, she recreates the spell. Mm-hmm. And when she makes like this, she combines wind and fire and sort of like feeds the fire and makes it this huge raging white inferno. It literally like burns the bottom of the trees and the tops of the trees fall down around her, and the ones that don't fall in the radius are just falling, like, a whole forest is like being toppled around her, like a cattle circle. But, and those kind of things, like, I don't know, just, I believe to add that sort of element, even if it's just a little bit, makes it more intuitive. Like when you have your magic systems and or your ideas for the characters or whatever, and you wrap it around something real. And then also, like you're saying, you don't step away from from what some people may call trivial, or what some like, oh, that doesn't matter, because you never know when that's going to be a great, piece of writing potential. That's going to, make your character even stronger, make them resonate, or who it's going to resonate with. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe, an amputee's reading your book.
Well, or example again for fantasy would be, what sounds better? He ran towards the big building at the center of the castle, or he charged the keep? Mm-hmm. Actually, Kat did one where she was editing someone's book and said, look, you need to understand how horses work.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
He put it in reverse, and then
so like I shifted it into turbo, man, and it like.
Well, and then Mohammed just said, I totally get that, but technically a lot of ship designs like in Star Wars aren't possible, but X-Wings are iconic designs. So I guess at what point would you stop?
Well, yeah, the designs in Star Wars aren't possible, but within the context of their universe, apparently they are.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is what I would say, okay? When it comes to that, you have to understand, again, this is research, right? You're not only researching like the kind of mechanics or whatever, or the fluid mechanics of the situation, but you also need to understand, because what they're doing in that is they're recreating the nostalgia effect of the World War II bombers and everything from that Lucas created, right? But in my opinion, like what Lucas was really going after was the dogfighting with the X-Wings and the TIE fighters and the stuff like that. He was going after more like the old dogfighting, right? And so the bombers that's why, to me, the bombers was a bad design and a complete misunderstanding of what was really going on.
Yeah. Okay,
you know what I mean?
A little beef about Star Wars, and I realize no one else is going to give a shit. This has always bugged me. Okay? That first movie set up the rules. And this actually, okay, this does right. That first movie set up the rules for how space and dogfighting works in that universe. Now, we already know that that's thoroughly unrealistic, but in that universe, that's how space works. Now, in that trench run, it was clearly established that the X-Wings had laser lock-ons for their target. And then no other movie ever had that. Then it was all dumbfire machine guns after that.
I never picked up on that. Wow.
Well, I mean, that's just like, they said in I think it was the first movie that a Star Destroyer could not enter an Earth's atmosphere. But hey, look at Rise of Skywalker, where they not only have them in the atmosphere, they've got horses riding on top of them.
Yeah, see, well, that's where, Lucas apparently, I guess, did a fairly good job establishing his universe's rules, and then everyone broke them.
Yeah, they just don't care.
I'm kind of reminded of anybody familiar with the musician Voltaire?
Oh yeah, love Voltaire.
Yeah, the SS just makes them shit up.
Yeah.
That's kind of where Star Wars is now. Actually, Star Wars is 10 times worse.
Well, even Star Trek with their spore drive and all that nonsense.
Oh dear Lord!
Well, again, yes,
Yeah.
completely violates the way the universe is set up. Star Trek especially had very concrete rules about how things work.
Well, Star Trek.
Well, yeah, that was the big difference, right? Between the two were the biggest difference is that, Star Wars, I understand it's sci fantasy.
Yeah. Yeah, there is no time distortion when you hit the speed of light in Star Wars.
Actually,
Did we cut out or did?
Oh nope. Yeah, I was waiting.
Talk about research. Star Trek. They actually got what, JPL?
That was Star Trek. He went to JPL. Roddenberry went to JPL and actually had them come up with the rules for the warp drive, the transporter, the med bay, how space worked, and how they got around time distortions.
And we were discussing, no, not last night, the night before last, how
Ghostbusters?
How Ghostbusters, they had actual physicists. Was it physicists?
Yeah, they got physicists and said, okay, well, if ghosts were this, how would you catch them? And they had physicists set up a series of rules and technologies for ghost busting. And they wrote around those rules in the first film. And then tossed it all out the window after that. Although the show respected it.
No, the game did.
Oh, the game too.
The game really got into it. I mean, you even got into bosons and things.
I don't really buy the boson dart, but we won't get into that.
It's a game. Okay, so moving on. So, we've all looked into stories. We've all, done research. What is a bit of information that you had not planned on finding, but it popped up and you realized I need to research this for my story?
I've done so much of it. Let me think about that for a second. Let someone else answer it. Well, no one's speaking, so maybe. Well, I mean, an easy one is that an amputee's legs swell or the stump swells at night. I didn't know that. Another one that was kind of cool was finding out exactly what they're feeling when phantom limb syndrome happens, what that actually is and what causes it.
Basically, I'm asking for happy accidents. Like you're writing your story and then some bit of information comes to you and you're like, I need to research this for my story. This is something I never would have thought of.
Well, I had something like that on a sort of a genre level because the story, the next campaign that I'll be putting out there for the Fallen with Rises, it's Sword and Sorcery, and it originally started as just an idea for just some sort of general fantasy, kind of thing in my mind. And I thought about, I don't want to play. It's probably going to be a little bit more like Robert E. Howard's style than Tolkien or whatever. And I've always loved, reading Conan stories and whatnot by Robert E. Howard, but I never really super studied the history of the genres and how Sword and Sorcery, expanded on, more the high fantasy and all this kind of stuff. But as I was trying to sort of find my niche and looking into it, then all of a sudden it was a little bit, it's kind of like a rabbit hole, but it was when you said one of those happy rabbit holes where it's like, oh, this is great, man. This is so useful. Now I really could understand and better situate everything that I was actually writing. And because originally this was a novel that I written years and years and years ago, but now I'm just sort of translating it. So, what's the word I'm looking for? Transferring it to script form. There's a word I'm looking for.
Transcribe?
Yeah, no, I don't know. Whatever.
Adapt?
Adapt. Thank you. Yeah, there you go.
I've had quite a few things where when I researched them that sort of changed the story. Like Sins of the Fae originally was less Celtic myth, and then I actually read a series called Iron Druid that I kind of hated, but I liked. I didn't like what he wrote about it, but I liked the idea of the actual like Celtic pantheon. They were kind of, and so then when I started, reading about them, I found, oh, this is interesting. And then how they're sort of like wrapped into the history of Ireland and even, Scotland and other places. I was like, okay, this is kind of neat, that this is like this, because this is a group that, not many people, I mean, we've all, Greek, Roman, even Egyptian to an extent, you know what I mean? It's kind of all out there, especially like with, the Percy Jackson series, that guy did both Egyptian and Greek, right? But the Celtic is much less touched on, and then there are other places too where I don't know. I find that like that almost always happens, honestly. Like if you do the research, then you're going to find things, because what I love to do is solve the problems with from my character within the story. I think if you do that, then you don't fall on like Deus Ex Machina or MacGuffins. And I try not to do that. Like I feel like a failure if I have to fail on that, because I feel like, okay, well, I'm not writing a complete story then. Mm-hmm. I'm missing, some transition elements. I'm missing something. And I think what you're missing is the meat of it. You know what I mean? It's the why, right? Because that's what ends up happening. And if you know how to build the bones of the story that you're creating, then you can figure out how to connect those muscles and make that arm move.
Okay, I've got one. The story I'm currently writing, Cyberpunk, there's a large portion of the story involving this screwed up post-war society having a labor shortage for various reasons, including a rejection of humanoid robots. And they have a shortage of grown men, so they fill that labor with orphans because there's an overabundance of them after the war. And I needed a model that kind of merged the concept of adoption and apprenticeship. And that's kind of what I was going for, is this kind of merging of the two, where people were adopting these kids, but also essentially they're there for free labor. And in my research, a happy accident that just expanded the whole thing was finding out that there was actually a period in this country's history in which exactly that happened. And it was called the Orphan Train, which occurred from 1854 to 1929. And it was actually the precursor to modern day adoption, believe it or not. But that was a really happy accident that just completely reinformed and kind of reshaped major parts of the story and how I'd approach it. Mm-hmm. So again, using history to inform a fictional made-up setting.
Got another super chat here, Kat, whenever you want to incorporate it. But thanks, Stage Boomer, for the super chat. I appreciate it.
Okay. Did everybody get a chance to answer the previous question?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I believe so.
I dig that power mower.
H Boomer asks, so we've been having a conversation about writing stories set in a past decade like the 1980s. What are the do's and don'ts of how you portray the past?
I've had a lot of experience with that on Case File Arkham.
You're supposed to slam in as many pop songs and cultural references and OMG, remember the nostalgia moments as you possibly can.
Is this like that weird nostalgia movie where they played the video game? What was that?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
I'm reminded of was it the pilot for that 90s show? Yeah, it's like, oh my god, I got a cell phone. It's like, oh.
I remember, like on It Chapter 1, there's that point where they're in front of the movie theater, and the movie theater is playing, was it Batman and I forget the other movie that's on the marquee, but those two movies they weren't even out at the same time. like not even the same time of year release.
Okay, I have a major beef with the current wave of 80s nostalgia. I'm a child of the 80s. That is my youth. And there was so much of that that is iconic and meaningful to me. And it really just kills me. Sorry, I apologize to the millennials listening. I am sick to fucking death of what millennials think the goddamn 80s were. I mean, this 80s nostalgia shit is what millennials think the 80s were, not what they really were. And it drives me up the goddamn wall. I would say if you really wanted to understand the 80s, to go back to, again, the media of the time and pay very, very close attention and then research where that came from, why that happened. And that's where you're really going to get it. And don't overdo the slang. Jesus Christ.
Oh, the slang.
Radical.
I would say right now, I'm doing this for my own story. I would say a great source is to go back to, if you're going to understand, for instance, like the punk culture of the time, watch The Decline of Western Civilization by, is it Patty? I forget the name of the director. 1 and 2. And if you want a very realistic window into the youth subculture of the time, those two documentaries are vital, because not only does it explore the music and the people making it, then there's these great just off the street interviews with teenagers. And you listen to how they really talk and what they really thought of things and why they were into it. And one thing that just kills me is if you really pay attention to the original punk scene that was covered in Decline of Western Civilization, the key aspect is it was anti-political. It was not liberal or conservative. It was anti-political. So this myth that punk is somehow left-wing just kills me. No, punk's message was fuck you. Films that really stick out in my mind that thematically, even though they weren't necessarily 100% accurate, that really, for me, encapsulated what I recall of the 80s. Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Owen? Oh, yeah. Metal played a huge part of the 80s. That was the actual second half. There's two, there's three actually. The first two, Decline of Western Civilization documentaries. The first is punk, and then the second is, I believe, the LA metal scene during the 80s. And it's well worth watching. Also, it's hilarious. But films that really feel like the 80s to me, Decline of Western Civilization, the original Suburbia.
Oh, wow.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The Terminator, the first film, believe it or not, there was just something about that film that once it captured the setting, but just the overall feeling of just this culture that was on fast forward, and everyone was just kind of waiting for that bomb to drop. And there was this underlying pessimism to the mass consumption and just the pop culture of the time. Repo Man is another one that just the kind of the bizarre insanity and madness that was overtaking things.
Not the genetic opera, the one with Emilio Estevez.
Yeah. Thanks.
Not the genetic opera.
Well,
So that's what I would say.
This might be really unpopular, but I really thought it did well. I don't know if you watched Ish. I'd be curious your thoughts on that, since you feel like you're pretty passionately about it. But I thought the first season of Stranger Things handled that very well. That's one of the things
fairly. I thought that was fairly respectful of the time.
Yeah, it hurt so much in season 3 when they just kind of
they
lost the plot. Yeah, exactly.
It went from being about the 80s, or actually, it wasn't even really about the 80s. It was about Steven Spielberg's 80s.
Mm-hmm. And Stephen King and all that, yeah.
Stranger Things was Steven Spielberg's version of the 80s, is what I saw.
Yeah.
So I think we missed something.
Where?
I don't know. I'm lost.
No.
Are you playing a video game, Dr. Wright?
No.
Oh.
I think I got too pissed off about the 80s.
I don't know. It's like I hear a TV or something in the background somewhere. I don't know whose it is, but
Yeah, it
Oh,
could be the kids screaming outside.
Yeah.
Okay, no problem.
Slightly too, actually.
Speaking of punk rock,
So, you guys, how do you approach doing period pieces?
I usually don't do
Or
a lot of
do
period
you?
pieces. I don't usually do a lot of period pieces because I don't like to step on toes. And I mean, I don't know. There seems to be a lot of things that you have to cover, or that, I mean, everybody's got what they remember about any particular period. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
What I usually try to do is, again, like, I want to understand, you know, what was going on, like what was happening in the 80s. Okay, what was happening in the 80s is that you had a lot of people that were working on things like nuclear bombs that all of a sudden didn't have a job. And they were brilliant. And so what did they do? They actually moved over to the economic sector and they started creating really weird formulas, and they created different kind of bombs, right? And they created all different kinds of new economic theories within the 80s. And then what did that do? Well, that drove the banks up crazy. The banks were making tons of money on speculation. And it was like people sort of knew it. I mean, you can talk to people. Like, I remember talking to a nurse, and she said, you know, she bought like 4, beach houses for, you know, what it would cost to buy like half of one today.
Well,
You know,
I wouldn't discount the 80s. Also, a lot of that economy was fueled by Coke.
oh yeah, well, I mean, it was
So seriously, there was
drugs,
a lot of
and I mean, there was just a
money
lot of
moving
stuff. Yeah,
I set the Tales from the Stacks. Each of those tales is set in mid '60s, and that
Okay.
wasn't necessarily the case when I first started writing those stories. But I thought, especially when I started putting them together in this compilation, the themes, everything just sort of resonated with some of the cultural anxieties or whatever in the mid '60s, and then all these other little things just clicked into place, like with the Discovering Evelyn story, you know, going into that club, you know, the burlesque club. I thought, well, it works so much better as sort of an analog to like a Playboy club kind of thing, you know, so that worked out. And Fire and Winter's kind of set in the mountains, so their culture is going to be whatever it wants to be anyway, you know, in a certain decade. But yeah, it just all kind of worked out together. So yeah, you can change settings like that even after you've written or started writing a story. You just have to go back and accommodate for that.
yeah, and you can mix things. I mean, if you want kind of understand, you know, the difference between the periods. Like you were kind of touching on it, Ish, and you and I think Xavius could probably go on this for hours about, you know, punk and industrial and everything else. But I think music, like if you actually understand kind of the impetus of music and you see where it comes from, you can kind of follow it and see where the different, you know, like what did you have? You know, you had the overabundant decadence of like heavy metal and everything, and the hair metal, especially, right, of the 80s. And then what happened? You kind of come into this period where, you know, kids sort of like they had so much that you know, the slightly older, you know, the 20 somethings were like stuck in this sort of mired malaise of you know, almost like a benign antipathy, and they're just like and so what came from that? Grunge, you know. It's like we're trying to be depressed, you know, and then Nirvana came and just like, I mean, I don't know, like cutting chaff from the wheat, from, you know, just sort of ended the hair metal period for some reason.
Well,
And go ahead.
no, I remember living through that period, and the 80s were so fun and vibrant, and so much good stuff was coming out. I mean, you look at what was playing at the theaters, you were looking at the records that were coming out, and it was just an incredible time. You know, all those cool cartoons.
Yeah, it was fun.
We were finally getting our second real dose of anime after the 70s. Robotech was another. It was an amazing time. And then the 90s rolled over, and I swear to God that it really was a situation, and I realize this has nothing to do with research, but I have a feeling that our parents, the boomers, suddenly said, oh, holy shit, there's peace with Russia. We're not all going to die. I'm going to have to pay for those credit cards. I'm going to have to take responsibility for these kids. I'm going to have to get old. And they just flipped out and went completely the other direction.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly everything had to be bubble wrapped, and suddenly they were going to care as parents, and suddenly they wanted to be your parents again. And it was, you know, and keep in mind through the 80s, it was this repeated message of, oh, well, we don't really, they were all absentee. There was like they're getting divorced. They didn't really like the fact that they'd had kids. They didn't want you around.
I'm reminded of a quote from The Simpsons where it's like, we preferred your half-assed under-parenting to your half-assed over-parenting.
I think that's what.
Oh yeah, Lisa says that.
I think that's what saved us, really. I think where the millennials suffered from the fact of helicopter parenting, I think Gen X actually did better on the fact that our parents just didn't even try.
Latchkey kids forever.
Oh, well, you had to learn to fend for yourself or it wasn't going to happen.
I survived off cold hot dogs and frozen fish sticks.
I think I don't know. Like I think some of that was just that. That was one of the first time periods too. Though I mean, it was the first economic boom after women's lib, right? And like what a lot of people, I talk about this all the time, or not all the time, but I talk about this sometimes. People don't get it, that it's a huge thing. We only have per capita so much demand. Okay. And per capita means like per person, right? So you only have per capita so much demand, but you effectively have more than doubled your potential for workforce in the past 40 to 50 years. So what happens to the economy when that happens?
Broken families.
Yeah. And then you add into that a mix of, again, like we were in the 80s, you had, all these parents and everything living high on the hog, living high on everything, right? A subprime, like lending out the wazoo, everything, because it was all based on speculation. I mean, who was it? Like even later, like 10, 15 years later, you had Enron, who literally made hundreds of millions on speculation. They would just make plans and the government would give them hundreds of millions. And then they found out they didn't do anything. So what happened, when somebody actually went to investigate and said, oh, by the way, all those power lines they were supposed to put up in California? Yeah, none of them are there.
Okay. Dark Stranger asked a very good question. What with all the research and effort into your creative works, what's a good way to tell plagiarism from inspiring via creating? I'm getting the Tom Lehrer song in my head about plagiarism.
What can you say what that means a little bit? Like, what are they asking?
Basically, what if you're doing all this research to put into your story,
Mm-hmm.
how do you know that you're not? I am assuming he means, how do you know if you're not accidentally plagiarizing an idea?
Like, especially like what Ishii was talking about, like watching movies and stuff like that from that time period and stuff.
Correct. You just get so much information, you may more than borrow from somebody. Gotcha.
I can say that sometimes, it's kind of tough. I would answer this, and I'm very sorry to the listeners. I would answer this, but I don't want to name any names. I really don't. But, I'll use a real vague one. The thing that drives me nuts is how many times I read a story and say, this is Dune. Where I read or it's a fantasy story, it's a sci-fi story, and usually the person's like, well, it's on a water planet. And it has nothing that you can't get anywhere else in the universe. And one person comes to a primitive people
but it's on a water planet, Ishii.
Oh, it's just this Earth Empire wants a certain material, and it's only on this one planet with a giant tree, and a tribal primitive people live there. One man of the Earth people comes down and helps lead them to victory. It's like, how many more times are we going to hear Dune?
Die Hard on a no. I remember in
Die Hard in a building.
Speed in the train. Speed
in a train.
So I don't know. I think you just have to be authentic.
You also have to kill your heroes, right?
Yeah. You have to kill your darlings.
But the idea of killing your heroes too is like you start out writing, and of course it's completely natural for you to start out writing like the writers that you love best. That's part of the writing process. But eventually you've got to get to the point where you kill that inclination off, and you're still going to be influenced and inspired, but you've got to find your own authentic voice, like you were saying, Dr. Wright, too,
Yeah, you have to have your own signature. I mean, it took me years. I think that's one of the things that's why, like, people like King say that, your first million million words are nothing but practice, because your first million words are somebody else's voice, usually somebody else's words almost. It's like even King, I remember when he wrote that, oh man, now I'm blanking on the name. I hate when I do that. I'm just thinking palaver. But when he when he was writing his series with Roland, and he was in the fictional world, and they were the fourth wall breaking and all that kind of stuff. When all that was going, he said he wanted to create something that was an homage to Tolkien, but he didn't want to make it exact. So he waited 10 or 15 years before he even tried to write it.
Yeah.
And some of that, he said, was that at the time when he wanted to write, he didn't have his own voice yet.
Mm-hmm.
And he wanted to wait until he did.
That actually segues into my follow-up, which is, how do you define the difference between homage and blatantly ripping off?
Well, that's another that calls me to Tales from the Stacks again, because I've told people on my channel before that first story, The Lady Inanna, that I actually wrote that story because there was a call out for submissions to a anthology that would honor Ray Bradbury. Oh. And I loved Something Wicked This Way Comes, growing up. That was one of the ones we did a book study on my channel. And I love Ray Bradbury anyway. I loved his his short stories and everything like that. And that is, he does like that kind of trope of that age of boyhood, the coming of age, the cusp of puberty and stuff like that. And he of course he writes with carnivals and stuff like that. So so the idea of that carnival sideshow dancer, it's definitely influenced and inspired by Bradbury, but I would challenge anybody to point to any story of Ray Bradbury's directly and say, here's your basic plot you just lifted, because I went a different direction. I went a different, I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain in the abstract, but the plot points have to be quite different.
I've got a question for you, Prof. Where does a story idea like having the hots for a mannequin come from?
Well, it's as old as Pygmalion. I mean, there's a long literary tradition of that kind of theme running out through literature. But if you look at stories, like you look at the story of Pygmalion, and you look at Kim Cattrall in the 80s film Mannequin, you can see they're in the same tradition, but they're vastly different plots, very different stories in general, even though one is hearkening to the other.
There you go. That's a good example of saying, well, this obviously is a retelling, but it's not stealing.
Yeah.
And I'll give another example where a writer took an initial idea, a classic idea, and made it his own. And that is Death Note. Has anyone else noticed Death Note is the ultimate retelling of Faust?
I haven't seen Death Note yet, but no, I want to because of that.
Oh, no. Prof, you would totally love Death Note. Although I'm going to say read the manga and beware of volume number 5, I think it is, because that's the mid-series slump and it hurts, but the rest of it is amazing.
Oh, I will do that. I will do that.
I actually haven't partaken of that either. I guess I'm going to need to.
Oh, please do. Please do.
So let's see. Just some other things getting back to research. When you're writing, and this is again why research is so important, is that you need to know the mindset of your character. And to know that, you're going to need to know their job, their background, their upbringing. All of this influences how they behave and act, especially how they speak. And often they're going to have experiences that you know nothing about. And so one of the best ways to become familiarized with it is to look to things that might be analogous to it, and then read biographies and histories of those periods and those things. Mm. As I've brought up so many times, when I did Titanium Rain, I read tons of biographies by fighter pilots. I went and talked to them.
Mm.
Actually, that does segue into my next question, which is, how do you prefer to do your research? Do you prefer to read things? Do you prefer to watch things, to go places? What is your preferred method of gathering your information?
Immersion. Absolute immersion. Everything from going to the museums, if I can touch an object, see an object, definitely do that. Definitely.
Is that why you were groping the fighter pilots?
Oh yeah, yeah, big sweaty men. No, actually, some of them were pretty hot. Actually, you'd be shocked how many female fighter pilots. Now there are not many of them, but a lot of them were really attractive. But
well, I mean, it kind of fits. You have to be a certain size, you know.
But I would say, yeah, reading books, watching related films that are very well established as being accurate. Documentaries are a wonderful thing. And again, YouTube, believe it or not, it is amazing how many people in different fields are just willing to put up videos talking about their work and their life.
Nice.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But you say that your preferred method is immersion.
Yeah.
I don't immerse. Maybe I'd be better suited if I did. I tend to hunt and peck as I go along with the story. Like, what do I need now? But see, the thing is, I've always written very different types of stories. I've never really written anything other than set in a different time period. I've never jumped into like a completely different world, except for the Fall of Mithrisis, which I'm doing now, which is sword and sorcery. It's and there is some things like I did have to research some of the things with the swords and different swords that would be, in this universe and stuff like that. So yeah, I have had to do some of that. I guess in terms of it's always better, I think, for me to see it visually. So if I could find a video or a movie or something like that, but I often get more information about it in some sort of reference piece, that's written down. If that makes any sense.
No, totally makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think I do a mixture of both. I love to immerse myself into whatever I'm writing. And obviously that includes, reading about like whatever mythology I can, reading about the new, or sometimes it means like I have elements in my book that are fictional, obviously because it's a fictional book, but deal with reality, like things with elitism, racism, economy, those sort of things. And I'll read about that kind of stuff to be able to write it better, to be able to understand what would happen, if the pieces were a little bit different, but the same kind of thing were happening. There were, what kind of, would the, the normie people see? What would the people in the trenches see? How would this change everything?
What you're saying is no matter what the setting, fictional or real or period in history, the human experience remains the same.
Yeah, there's got to be a high level of verisimilitude.
One question for Kat. So, okay, so what would be the most extreme form of immersion I've ever done for research?
The most extreme form of immersion you've ever done.
You may have to think about that for a while. So
I'm probably going to have to think about it, but I do think it was definitely, we went to the air show and you went to each booth of each squadron that was there and you talked to each of the pilots and asked them like every question under the sun.
Bizarre things, too, like what do you do in your free time? Or
what do you do in your free time?
Did they give you an eye? Like
oh yeah, definitely. I got all sorts of great books.
Boxers or briefs.
Well, yeah, actually, that is a real question, but not for the men. Women,
for the men.
The women need a very, very good, hefty sports bra while in the cockpit, so those tits. Gravity is not kind to boobs.
It makes sense with the G's and everything. Yeah,
the G's. Yeah.
Okay.
What are we even talking about right now?
We're talking about boobs.
I know.
Everyone's favorite subject.
We're talking about flotation devices. There are many of them, and
there are many, but these are mine. No. Okay. Mohammed asks, how do you make sure that your story is yours and not a watered down mess because it's already been done structurally? I would come up with so many ideas on my own and then find out somebody else has done them.
That's why you need editors and beta readers and everything else, because you just do that.
That's
I mean,
also
that that happens. Go ahead. Sorry.
no. I'm sorry. Finish. Good.
I was just saying, I mean, that's you research, you do everything you can. I mean, basically, if you want to do something good, if you want to write, okay, writing is a vocation. And if you want to do it professionally or at a professional level, then you have to treat it professionally. And so research is part of that. And that's just, one of the major things. But it's not going to make you perfect every time. No matter how well you do it, no matter, if you immerse yourself or hunt and peck or whatever, you're still going to need somebody to come afterwards and say, it wasn't quite like that. Mm-hmm. Because that just makes it better. And I mean, one of the greatest things that you can develop as a writer is a thicker skin, is an ability to take criticism and let it roll off of you and, keep going. Because if you can't, you're not going to be able to write.
Yeah. I would also say the focus needs to be on your story and not the genre that you're writing in, or the, so many people have written in fantasy or science fiction before. No. If your story is a real, true, solid, truthful story to you, if you got that down and you're treating that with respect and approaching it in the right way, then the genre around it, that's just even if it's a dime a dozen genre, if your story sings and if your story's unique, that's what you should be worrying about, not so much the genre.
Yeah, your story is always going to resemble other stories. That's just the nature of fiction itself and mythology. I mean, the
hero's journey.
Yeah, I mean, the human experience, we can all relate to certain things. There are certain things we all share, so therefore it's going to come up time and time again. What you need to focus on is the story you want to tell and what you bring to it. I mean, what is it that you're trying to get? What is it in you that's pushing you to do this? Why are you putting this to the page? Often the worst offenders of, this is a ripoff, are people who really just wish they had written somebody else's story. That's what I usually say.
So like any writer of today, I don't know. I think so many people today it just feels like, especially movies, are just creatively bankrupt.
Well, I don't want to get into Hollywood. I think for writing, the part that depresses me the most and the biggest problem with writing today is the publishing establishment has definitely gone out of its way to limit the field of what we get to see and who gets published. And it's a very narrow scheme of things, and talent has nothing to do with it. And the other thing I see that a lot of new writers do is they'll often write visually. They're thinking in terms of film. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many stories I've read where they're writing as if the reader is watching them describe a film.
Or an instance I was describing last night, which is what I think a lot of people who write for film do, but they unfortunately they can't get started in film, so they start in comics or prose and then they move up. But you can see the same thing, which is that they're writing to a scene, like they're writing to make a scene happen. And because of that, you end up being contextually driven. Like there's no subtext, it's all context, and it's on rails.
How do you mean? I think I get what you're saying.
Well, when you have things like, I hate to use this as an example again, but things like Star Wars. My biggest problem with like The Last Jedi is that it's contextually driven. It can only happen the way it happens. You know what I mean? It's just so crazy. So like you have this many MacGuffins and this and that because you're forcing something, you're driving it. It's sort of like if you've ever played Dungeons and Dragons or any kind of game and you have a DM and that won't let you do anything but what he wants you to do. Mm-hmm. You try to leave the town and he's like, oh, well, there's this, so you can't go there. You're like, okay, well, I'm going to go investigate. Oh, you can't. That door's locked. And you finally just like, okay, fine. I go to the tavern.
Well, I set certain rules for me when I was writing Case File Arkham to avoid certain genre cliches. And among those rules is one, you would never get a scene where a girl walked in to the detective's office. Ever. No scene was ever going to begin in the detective's office. Ever.
You don't think that? I mean, that was just ingratiating. That that's like male fantasy, right? The woman got. She's like, can you help me?
I have no problem with that.
Yeah, right.
Was at no point in the story was the detective going to get everyone together or the villain and explain to them the villain's plan and say,
Oh, come on, man.
The drawing room reveal, that's
never
classic.
going to happen.
Did not want a Poirot, this is how you could have done it.
But you didn't. Ha! Yeah.
Was like, I mean, what is that? Like, or more deconstruction with Watchmen, right? Like at the end, Ozymandias, he's like, "What? Do you think I'm a comic book villain? I already did this 30 minutes ago. Peace out."
Okay, well, I don't know. I'm not sure I have much to bring to this right now, or if I'm just wearing down. But does anyone have any last minute questions? Because I'm kind of wearing out.
Yeah.
Understandable.
There's always a little delay too between when we ask the question and when they actually get to write it down.
Owen says, at Professor Geek and Dr. Wright, my writing process is to draw the panels and the character, then write the dialogue that comes from my head. Probably should find a better way of writing.
Actually, no, that's not a bad method. If that is the way that works best for you, there's nothing wrong with that.
That's pretty much how you write your scripts, isn't it, Ishi?
No, actually, the way that I write my scripts is first I'll sit down and do this very raw sort of dialogue and actions just straight down the page. And then I'll do panel layouts and decide where those go and how I think that would best look with the little collages I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll have the dialogue bubbles put in. Then it goes to the artist, and when it comes back, I rewrite the dialogue based on what the artist has done.
Okay.
Okay, Dark Stranger has a question. I did just ask him to clarify because I'm not entirely sure what he's asking, but I also am tired too. So it's how far would be too far in the way of content that outweigh the story and a good means of realizing it to fix it?
Yeah, that needs a bit more of an explanation. Let's go on to King Fort before we...
Okay. King Forte says, I'm having trouble writing as it feels like a chore and at times I hate it, even though the story is something I like, but feel burned out and not want to think about it.
Welcome to being a writer.
Yeah.
Welcome
All writers hate to write. We love to think about what we're going to write. We love to talk about what we're going to write. And we really love to have written. But writing is hard. It's blood, sweat, and tears.
And it's all failure. You don't know why you're doing it.
I hate to disagree with you, Prof. There are parts where it's pain and it's hard and it's an endurance run and you just got to do it. But then there are those wonderful moments in which
in the zone. You can get in the zone, yeah.
Sit down and you're just having a great time. And then for a lot of us, there are certain types of writing that we love to do. I mean, I love writing these really short sentences that have tons of information and seeing how well I can construct a paragraph to get the most mileage out of it with the fewest words. I love crafting visuals.
Love crafting.
Oh, shut up.
I am reminded of the other aspect of the Egyptian god Thoth. Everyone knows him as the ibis-headed scribe. The other aspect of him is of the baboon, and there is a statue. If I ever see a recreation of it, I will buy it, and that is of the scribe working furiously while the baboon is sitting on a pedestal looking down at him. And that statue quite literally depicts that drive or that need to write no matter what. It's the baboon forcing you to put your thoughts onto the page, and if you don't, he'll fucking kick your ass.
Yeah, that's the muse, right? See, that is. I want that statue too. But no, see, that's for me. Like, there are those zones and stuff like that. I wish I had Ishi's experience more like that though, because those zones are rare for me. More likely for me, I'm writing a story, and the ideas are kind of like I know how the story's going to go or the next scene's going to go, and I'm really excited about that. I'm like, oh, I gotta write it down now, though. Gotta, you know, and because I don't know, it's just it's work, but it's worthy work. Like it's worth it, you know. And even as you're writing, you know it's worth it. Even if you got to go back and revise it, you know, if you believe in what you're doing, and if you're in that zone where you got the story, you know, and it's coming and everything, and you're not just like completely uninspired, and you're just putting words on a screen to say that you're putting words on a screen, that's a slog.
The way to get through those parts where it hurts is to just write it anyway, and maybe even write it a few times. But that often kind of clears the cobwebs and you find the way. Sometimes you got to write it wrong a few times. And it's not being afraid to just sit down and put it on the page first.
Yeah, you have to absolve yourself from being able to write something perfect every time, because it's never going to be perfect, most likely.
The best part is sometimes you come back after thinking it's complete shit and you're just like, hey, this is not bad. I just need to move a sentence.
I get the opposite usually, where I think it was great, and then I come back the next day and I'm like,
I never get that. Whenever I write anything, I walk away going, yeah, great job.
No, actually, I'll be at work and I'll get a message from him saying, I think this is crap. What do you think? And I'll read it. I'll go, no, you're fine. So yeah, he's always very critical. Okay, Dark Stranger clarified what his question was, and he said that I see in stories sometimes people go too far with action or fan service, and for a self-publisher who does not have access to editors, what's the best way to notice or avoid this on your own?
Hire Cat as your editor or the prof.
There you go.
Seriously, get an editor. I'm sorry. That is the most effective way to do it, because you're going to be too close to your work. And there's often times when you just don't see it.
Yeah.
And the other nice thing about an editor is often they'll show you your brilliance when you don't see it.
Or a good trusted group in a workshop setting, which is hard to find. But
yeah.
So much workshop groups are like public stonings. Have you ever noticed that?
Yep.
I mean, a lot of the workshop groups, I even had some where I was paying for them. I mean, they did help, but it got to the point where once I became a regular contributor and and you get to the regulars, quote unquote, you have a small select few that actually want to help everybody, be a better writer. But then you have people that become they edit competitively.
Yeah.
So like they really just want to, like, if they think they get offended that you found something wrong with their piece, so they want to find something wrong with yours.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, not in a helpful way. You know what I mean? Just in a like, oh, I'm gonna get back at you kind of thing.
There are a lot of pitfalls. That's a new service I'm offering on my site. I want to once we're done with the stream, once everybody's finished and everything like that, I might spend a few minutes just kind of going over that service and everything, so I can clip it out later and put it as its own video. But you're absolutely right. Both everything you're saying, it's a real struggle to find a good workshop group that's full of people who want to be there for the right reasons and are working for the right reasons.
Yeah, I mean, because and you can see the ones that want to be there. You know what I mean? They don't have themselves in it. They just want to get better. They're just there for the writing. And but they're few and far between. I mean, if you're in those and you're paying for them or you're not, and you find those kind of people, hold on to them at least as a beta reader, because they're hard to find.
True.
Okay, this is totally unrelated and horribly unprofessional, but I'm hoping somebody's listening. Whoever wrote Royalty and Ravagers and sent it to me to review, I've been reading it, but I don't remember who sent it to me. I'm really sorry. I can't find the email. If you're listening, contact me and say, that's my story, because I have been reading it.
There you go.
Sorry, I'm wiped out. I think I'm done.
Okay, man. It's understandable.
No, it's we're in California and we're having Santa Anas right now. And
Oh,
for those who have not experienced the Santa Anas, it's basically the wind is on fire and it's raging through. So, I mean, the trees have been literally doubled over because the wind's been so strong here.
Yeah, it's got this weird kind of rust taste to it when you inhale it, and it's just ugh. Yeah.
And it is very draining. So,
yeah.
actually, I'm very happy that the knock on wood.
So you're living in
gone
Dune. So you're living in Dune.
Yes.
Well, that's the thing about California is it's a desert pretending it isn't.
Right.
We're a desert with ocean. So not only is it a desert, but we have water that you can't drink.
Just saying, you've already got family in Virginia,
Virginia's
Look at that state to move
expensive,
to.
but so's California.
That is true. Actually, we went by your work, Prof. We went to, I am totally blanking on the name, Monticello.
Oh, Monticello. Yeah, where I used to. Yeah.
Yeah. We went there when I was in Virginia. That was a lot
Very
of fun.
cool. Very cool. Well, I'm going to stick around after you guys check out, but I'll let you guys do the sign off and everything.
Well, I'm J Ishiro Finney, your pal, and feel free to contact me if you need questions about the 80s or writing answered.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Right is in at Dr. Right is in on Twitter. You can feel free to reach out to me anytime if you want to talk about writing or stories. I love talking about writing. I love talking about stories, especially mine. No, I'm just kidding. You can talk to me about yours too.
All right, and I've got links to your YouTube channels in the description below. And for Dr. Wright, for you, I've got the Insider link because I know you were saying that's the one you do more stuff on.
Yep, that works.
And I'm Kat Rocha. I am the night editor, KNIGHT editor.com. And I should have the next episode up. I'm hoping for tomorrow. If not, it'll definitely be up by Saturday. I started school again this week, and that threw my plans of recording way out the window. So
Nice. Cool. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for a great episode of the Writers' Room. Kat, great to have you as the host, and good topic. So we'll be back in 2 weeks then?
Yeah, absolutely. And one other question, Prof. You still haven't told me what movie we're watching this weekend.
Oh, you might not like it. I decided that since we watched Hellraiser last weekend, I need to go about as far away from that as I possibly can. So I'm going to watch beloved classic Ernest Scared Stupid.
Oh, jeez.
that is the one Ernest film I have not seen. I've seen all the other ones.
It's so good
in the theaters. So.
I've never seen.
I think you should just go even a step further. Go watch Jean Cocteau's Beauty and the Beast. There you go.
We are going to watch the Wednesday before Halloween. We're going to do a special Halloween rewatch of the Halloween Tree, the Ray Bradbury classic by Hanna-Barbera that won all those awards. So. And links will be provided to both of those movies, so you don't have to own them.
And by the way, Prof, I love the fact that you're covering Jekyll and Hyde. That is one of the books that it is, talking about research. I have always felt that I need to actually know the Western canon if I'm going to be editing. And so I've been trying to read as many classics as possible. And it's amazing how many of them are not what people think they are. And Jekyll and Hyde is one. So I'm so glad that you're covering that right now.
Yeah. Well said. Thanks.
All right. Good night, guys.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
All right. So I'm going to stick around here with everybody in the chat who wants to continue hanging out, because this is something that I wanted to take a few minutes and show. And actually, it's great if you guys have questions, feel free to ask them. But I wanted to do this, tack it on as part of another live stream, so I didn't have to do it as its own live stream and just further burden my channels with live stream after live stream after live stream, because I want to cut this out and make it its own video. So I've been talking for a while. I've been doing my editorial services, and that's still going great. I get a lot of responses. I put a tweet out earlier today. At the end of this week, I have a couple slots that are falling open. So if anybody wants to jump in on the editorial services, please do, hit me up now so that you can get those slots. Because I can only do but so many at a time without having to make somebody wait, 6 months, before they hear back from me and everything. So let me open up this page though, because I went ahead and made a new page on my website, michaelkreitzer.com, and linked it here. So this is my my services to writers. Let me make sure I got that shared and everything. Okay, so I'm going to walk through this a bit, and then I'll go back to the chat and look for questions if anybody has specific questions or whatever. But just to recap the editorial services first, and then I'll go to the new workshop service I'm offering. So Editorial, the package I'm offering right now is $60, which is if you're not used to, if you have never hired an editor before, you might not be used to, having to pay something like that. $60 is unreal. You'll never get a and I'm doing this for the writers, specifically the writers who are wanting to create their own comics, for crowdfunding platforms and everything like that. But it's not only comic scripts. I mean, people are sending me their prose and their, a section of a novel or whatever, anything like that is fine. Screenplays even and stuff. So that's, that's fine. I've got experience with all of that. But it's the $60 includes a 20-minute Skype call, which it opens up. Before I even read the draft, it's a 20-minute Skype, up to a 20-minute Skype call. It doesn't have to be. And some people that just didn't want to talk on Skype, and they'd rather just do this out through email. That's fine too. But it can be a Skype session up to 20 minutes where we talk about your idea. You get to tell me what your concept is, what you're hoping to achieve with it, and any concerns you might have or whatever. Then I go through, and it's 10 manuscript pages. Now, the immediate thing people say is, oh, but my story's 70 plus, whatever. You don't need somebody to read your entire story until you've pretty much done with it. Like, you just need that, all in one sitting, you need somebody to sit down and do a proofread or something like that. Otherwise, if you send me the first 10 pages of your script or whatever, no matter how long your arc is or anything like that, any of the issues that I identify or any of the things that I pull out that are really great, you should really play that up. You will be able to take all of that from those first 10 pages, and it doesn't matter if you've got 10 more pages or 200 more pages. You'll be able to drastically alter and edit and rewrite the rest of your work just from that. And then the next time you want to have me or some other editor look at it, you send the next 10 pages or something like that. But editing's it's a lot of work to really pour over somebody's work and do it and give it its due. It's time consuming. So I've got to keep the pages down, and that's about again in terms of cost there, what is better than what you get in other places. And then it'll end up with a final 20-minute Skype call after you've received my comments. So if you need clarification on anything, it's often easier just to answer those questions or discuss things like that over voice. But again, some people would just prefer to do it via email, and that's totally fine. So that's just a recap of the editorial services. Let me jump in the chat here. Unless now that it's the regular stream again, I can get to my old shenanigans. All right, so let me move into now the workshop idea. Now, there's a lot of I'm going to talk about. Once I got people who are interested in this, we actually go in. I'll talk about what rules for workshopping, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that here. But this is a new service for people who want a professionally led workshop group. So workshopping is when you have a group of writers around you, and you're taking turns reading each other's scripts, or you've read those, beforehand. Then you have the meeting, and then you're giving each other comments on each other's work, and everybody's doing that. There are a bunch of benefits to this. For one hand, as a writer, you receive not just one person's feedback on your script. So maybe if I'm just not like, let's say if I just didn't quite get this scene, I didn't quite get what you're trying to portray, but let's say everybody else in the group got it and loved it, well, then count me as odd man out then, it's just somebody, so you get different perspectives to pile up onto your work, which is good. You also learn and grow exponentially as a writer when you start to comment on other people's drafts. And you might think that, well, I haven't studied this or whatever. What can I comment? Hey, you're a reader, and you can give your reader's reaction. And the more you start to do that, the more you'll find out that you know a lot more than you think you do. And, it just cements things in your mind a bit more in terms of the craft of writing when you're commenting on other people's works, and that sometimes that stuff will be brought out more to the forefront when you work on your own writing. So it's incredibly useful to have some experience and regular experience even in workshop groups. So the cost for this is $40, a little bit less than the editorial services, because I'm not going to be pouring over these drafts as I would for the editorial services. I'm just going to read them, as I would in a workshop setting, and give my comments as well. And I'll be there to lead, the group. So it's going to be 4 writers and myself. Now you're not going to be workshopping my work or anything. I'm just there to lead and kind of facilitate. But you'll have 3 writers as yourself. So if you're interested in this, well, Well, let me talk about let me do it. If you're interested in this, first you'll have to email me your draft, indicating your entry to tell me you're interested in the workshop, and you email me your draft. The reason you need to email me your draft first thing is because I need to see what kind of level your draft is at, and I don't want to pair you up with people who are vastly levels, So I mean, it's not going to be a lot of use to you to be paired in a workshop with people who are lower than you skill level or higher than you skill level, or if you draft the manuscript as well. Like, let's say this manuscript has been toned for a while and it's been through some things and it's coming back for another go, versus a manuscript that's this is the first time it's ever been workshopped. You want to have some level playing ground, that to have everybody get the best they can out of it. So once I receive at least 3 other manuscripts on the same level in the process as yours, I'll email you with the group of possible assignments. I'll email all the people involved and say, okay, it looks like we got a workshop group here. Are all of you in? Do all of you want to do this? And if you do want to do this, if everybody's in, that's when you can go ahead and send the payment at that point, because there's no sense paying before we actually get anything scheduled. So if we get it all in the books, if we get everybody paired up, then we'll go ahead and schedule it. Then you can go ahead and pay, and we'll set the date that works for everybody. And we'll just do that as a Skype session. Or if I find some other service that works better for group calls, we can do it via that. But this is the only way to do it, where we can all be there together. And what this will entail is you'll have read each other's scripts beforehand, or manuscripts or whatever, before the actual session, and you'll have commented on them, however you want to do it, writing in the margins. I like track changes. That works best, I think, in the Microsoft Word function, but you'll have commented on them there. And then at this workshop session, this is when you're giving some verbal feedback and kind of expanding on and talking a little bit about some of the things you wrote down. And at the end of that, we'll go through and do each person's script. And then at the end of that session, that's when we email each other those scripts with our comments and everything, so that they can have those as well in case they, forgot some of the things that we said in person and everything like that. So that's how the workshop session will work. I don't know how this is going to be. A lot of people indicated interest, like, yeah, I'd love to do the workshop, But, usually when you put it out there and say, okay, this is how to do it, go ahead and follow these instructions, and then you see how many people are really interested in it. So we'll see. So my email's there. It's j.michaelkreitzer@gmail.com. It's in most of the descriptions of these videos as well. So if anyone's interested in the workshopping service, we'll see if I get enough interest, and if I get enough people to put together a group or multiple groups, that's great too. So we'll see that. So now let me jump over to the comments, see if anybody has any questions about this kind of stuff. Owen Lister says, I have a 20-page comic I'm working that's also a script. It's a Skype thing I'm not sure about, I'm set up for, but the workshop sounds cool. I don't have a mic, just my iPhone. iPhones have worked for stuff like that. Excuse me. I've done Skype on an iPhone before. As long as we can hear you. I mean, you don't have to come through in radio quality or anything like that. If you're concerned about your setup, you can contact me and we can do a test Skype session just for a few minutes, just so I can see how you sound. And if, as long as we can make you out, your voice and everything, that's fine. And this doesn't have to be like cameras. We don't have to see you. All we need to do is hear you anyway. So, you can call into Skype and stuff like that as well. So tech shouldn't be a problem at all, especially using Skype. Anybody's smartphone can have a Skype app on it. So that shouldn't be too much of a problem, but good question. Let's see. Agent Boomer says, I'm working on a crime story right now. When I feel it's ready, I'd like to workshop it. Great, cool. Yeah. A lot of people are, still working on manuscripts, and, it's nice to know that this is out there for them when it comes to that. But we'll see. It's this is just something I'm going to try now, and we'll see if it works. Muhammad said, I'm a bit scared about plagiarism. I got to be honest, and I do hate my voice and don't love showing it off, and social anxiety, I guess. Social anxiety is a real thing. I've got that as well. But, so you'll have to be okay. You have to get over that at some point just to be able to talk, there. And in terms of plagiarism, with the copyright laws, technically, once you've written down anything, it's yours. You write down something, that's yours. Now, there are all kinds of ways to try and prove that later. For example, you might write a manuscript, and, in the past, people have written something down and then mailed it to themselves and left it unopened so that it has the postmark stamp or whatever, so you can do little tricks like that or whatever. I've never had any trouble with plagiarism. Really, to be honest, it's none of us are like, sitting on the next Star Wars and, the one person's going to steal it and then make a lot of money on it. I mean, that's the fear in your mind all the time, but that's not really how it works. You're going to be improving and stuff like that. And you will be influenced by, or inspired to try something, a little out there, a little bit more in the vein of another writer or whatever. And that's fine, but I'm just trying to assuage that fear. AJ Boomer says, can he send the copy of his story to himself in an email? I don't know about emails. I don't know if that would be I guess. I mean, in theory, right? I mean, there's timestamps, but I don't know. It's probably too easy to manufacture or to falsify via email wise. I can imagine that'd be pretty easy to fake. I don't know, but hey, well, whatever. I mean, you can probably look up ways to do that too, that are out there. I've just never really researched that. So that's all I've got then. I just wanted to go over that bit about the writing services. So just putting this out there. So now it's out there and we'll see what happens. I am getting people, clients for the editing services. And, like I said, I've got some spots opening up. So please do let me know if you're interested in that. But otherwise, the workshopping thing is there. I will place a link to this page in the description of this video that I end up cutting and posting as its own video. So that'll be there. It's also currently pinned to my Twitter, but you can find it there and always email me later if you have questions that just occur to you, or if you stumble across this later, as its own video and have a question that no one else asked here, feel free to hit me up on Twitter via DM or just email me there at that address and you can ask it. So, yeah, so that's all for today. I'm going to go get some work done and whatnot, but thanks everybody for hanging out in the writer's room. That was a great session we did today. And thanks for hanging out and letting me talk a little bit about these services for a bit more. And until next time, I will keep enjoying and digging deeper into the stories I love, and you do the same. Save that. Nice. See you, everyone.